Hi. So I'm pretty proud of my baby, you'll soon discover. What you're looking at on the screen right now is the first computer. It's called Baby, believe it or not. And it was built in 1948 in Manchester, England. And I went to visit it, and this is what was on its screen. The first computer had pixels. And the word PIXAR was scrolling across the screen. The first computer had pixels and could animate. Really surprised me. And I quickly discovered the actual first pixels. These are they. Then I found the first interactive video game, 1951. Then I found the second video game, 1952. Which brings me to probably the most important picture I want to show you today, which is a picture of Moore's Law. Now, everybody thinks they know Moore's Law. It's usually expressed as the density of transistors on an integrated circuit chip doubles every year and a half, say. I find that non-intuitive. So I've converted that statement of Moore's Law into what you see at the top of the screen there. Everything good about computers gets better by a factor of 10 every 5 years. And what I'm going to try to convey to you is how revolutionary that statement is. It has driven my entire career and underlies everything that probably everybody in this room has done in their lifetime. It's why we have the digital world that we have today. Factor of 10, I didn't choose it casually. A factor of 10, we call it an order of magnitude because it's not just a bigger number, it's different. Human beings max out at about a factor of 10. We can't imagine beyond a factor of 10. It takes new thinking abilities to think beyond a factor of 10. And what I'm telling you is that the computer revolution has been through 10 factors of 10 since 1965. During the first computer came along in 48, and there was like 17 years where computers got bigger and faster, but they got bigger, a lot bigger. Starting in 1965 with the integrated circuit chip, they started getting smaller, but faster and cheaper and better. And this curve that you see on the screen is Moore's Law curve. You cannot think, in 1965, you could not imagine what it meant to have 10 orders of magnitude. Computers today are now 10 billion times better than they were when I made my first computer graphic in 1965. 10 billion. It's a meaningless number. I just tell you, the only way you can understand what that means is to be there. The only way, I keep hearing the death knell for Moore's Law. That's because the engineers can't imagine how to push it another order of magnitude until they get to the current order of magnitude. And then suddenly they come up with some idea to push it another order of magnitude. As far as we know, it's still going, and by 2025 we'll hit 1 trillion. Computers in 2025 will be 1 trillion times more powerful than they were in 1965. The challenge to you, and I'll reissue it later, is what are you going to do with that extra 100x or 1000x that we know is coming? That's 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. You probably can't imagine it, but I'd like for you to try. So I'm going to take it on a very quick tour of Moore's Law using the part of the world that I know, which is the history of the group now known as PIXAR. We're going to start out at, I already told you about the first computer graphic that I made in 1965 in New Mexico. We'll go to Xerox PARC, New York Tech, Lucasfilm, and so forth, and to PIXAR. And then I'll try to imagine what the next step might be. Okay, in the lower left you'll see a 10x. That's the Moore's Law factor at work for the slide that's up. And in the other corner are the corresponding year range. So we've just leapt ahead from 1965 by 1 5-year period or 1 order of magnitude. What happened there? We suddenly got color pixels. One of the luckiest breaks in my life was to be at Xerox PARC when the personal computer was invented, and my contribution was the first color graphics. No color before this. It's hard to believe. This is roughly 500 by 500 pixels. My friend Dick Schaup built the first color machine. and I contributed the HSB color transform. I was hired as an artist, actually. But Xerox decided not to do color, one of their famous decisions, infamous decisions, not to do the personal computer and not to do color. So they fired me. So let's leap ahead 5 years. Another order of magnitude, we're now 100x, to a place called New York Institute of Technology on Long Island, run by a very crazy wealthy man, the first of many patrons I had along the way. He had bought, Alexander Schur was his name, he had cobbled together several estates on the fabulous North Shore of Long Island, and he had turned the mansions on those estates into the buildings on his campus. So, for example, in the lower right, you see the D. Seversky mansion where we did video, and in the upper right is the Gehry house, and in particular, the garage of the Gehry house was where the group now known as PIXAR began. I met Ed Catmull here. He and I would later co-found PIXAR. So our joke is we got started in a garage too. It just happened to be a 4-car garage. Several things, amazing things happened here. One was Dr. Schur had this entire old-fashioned cell animation team on the campus as well. And he wanted us somehow to figure out how to use computers to ease the process. We did not succeed then because the computers were way too slow, but we did get the idea right then and there that why don't we be the very first group in the world to make an entirely computer-generated movie? So that's where we had the idea, 1975. Because of the wealth that this man contributed to our project, we had the best computer graphics lab in the world. We had the first, and you're looking at a picture of it, the very first full-color pixels, 24 bits per pixel, which is what you have on your iPhones today. We had the very first color graphics, full-color graphics, at New York Tech, and we just blew out the stops. We knew we were ahead of the world, and we were having a ball. We could not sleep. We were so excited. By the way, the memories that held those pixels cost about $1 million in today's money. Another exciting thing happened there. I met Ed M. Schroeder, one of the great artists who influenced me greatly. And he and I made a piece. That's me with the black hair, by the way. He and I made a piece together called Sunstone that is now in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art. I'm extremely proud of it. All right, another thing that happened was, well, I showed you the cell animator guys on the New York Tech campus were making Tubby the Tuba. It was awful. You've probably never seen it because it just stinks. And we realized we had the wrong guy. We weren't going to make a movie with this guy. And about that time, George Lucas asked us to come join him in California. So we left from Long Island to Marin County, and this is some of my geniuses in the computer graphics group at Lucasfilm. On my right is Ed Catmull, who would be the co-founder of PIXAR with me. On my left is our secret weapon, John Lasseter, that Ed and I met on one of our secret trips to Disney. We made secret pilgrimages to Disney every year for 8 or 9 years, saying, "Are you guys ready yet?" And they would always say no. But we met this guy, John Lasseter. He was just a kid, and we snapped him up. There are a lot of Academy Awards represented by the group you see on the screen. Turns out George Lucas didn't really understand what he had. And he never, even though I had assembled this fantastic group of people, he never came and asked us to be in the movies. And I finally realized he doesn't get it. But Paramount did come to Lucasfilm and ask for special effects for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. We got the job, and that was my directorial debut on the big screen. That group I showed you, without John Lasseter, he hadn't joined us yet, made this piece and got on the big screen, and that was the beginning of the Hollywood use of computer graphics. The next thing that happened was Ed and I decided we would announce to the world that we did character animation. Not special effects for space operas, but character animation. And lucky for me, I just hired John Lasseter, and I directed him in his very first piece of character animation, Andre and Wally B. The technical guys solved motion blur, which is what you see on the right, which was crucial to the success of computers in the movies. Another thing that happened was that Disney finally approached us. After Eisner and Wells took over Disney, 1 month later they knocked on our door and said, you know that you always said you could digitize our process, our cell animation process? Let's do it. So I negotiated the CAPS deal with them, and the two companies have admired each other ever since because it was such a successful project. And then a Japanese company came to us and said, now this is while we're still at Lucasfilm, and said, let's make a movie. Let's make the first computer movie. We thought this was it. I sat down. John Lasseter started designing characters. The Monkey King character. We did market studies. We did story treatments. And all of a sudden I discovered Moore's Law wasn't there yet. When I ran the numbers for the deal, I had to back out of the deal. We needed 5 more years, another order of magnitude of Moore's Law. And right at this moment was when George and Marcia Lucas got divorced, and suddenly George Lucas couldn't afford us any longer. And I just found out we had 5 years we had to cover before we could get computers fast enough to do movies. So I went to Ed and I said, Ed, let's start a company. These are two nerds talking to each other. Let's start a company to give these people a home and we'll build computers and sell those or something like that to cover ourselves for 5 years. So we went across the street and bought How to Start Company books and wrote the plan and hired the people and tried to raise the money, and we ran into all kinds of problems. We went through 45 funding possibilities, getting no at every turn, until finally we got this guy Steve Jobs to say yes. And Steve, his version of it is that he bought us from Lucasfilm. That's not what happened. He funded the spin out of a corporation of which Ed and I were the management, and he was he was a majority shareholder because he was busy by this time running his new company called Next. So I'm not going to tell you about the next 5 years while we waited for Moore's Law because they were pretty awful. We weren't very good manufacturers, and we should have failed. Luckily, Steve kept writing the checks because he didn't want to be embarrassed. And then 5 years passed, Moore's Law got there, Disney showed up and said, let's make that movie. And they funded the production of Toy Story, and the rest is history. I'm showing you slides at the top from Toy Story 1 and slides at the bottom from Toy Story 2, just to show you some human-like characters that were rendered by PIXAR at various stages. And this is another human, so to speak, from Ratatouille, one of my favorite PIXAR movies. I'm trusting that most of you have seen these, so don't have to say much about these. Thank you. But it brings me to the future. In 2000, Scientific American asked me to say something about the possibility of replacing actors on the screen with computer simulations. And I very carefully wrote this article in which I predicted that by 2020, there would be a cameraless movie. In other words, it would look like live action with human beings and emotional close-up, but all the humans would be computer generated. But I was very careful to say the avatars, the appearance of the humans would be animated, but the actor behind it would still be a human being, because we haven't got a clue, even today, how to replace acting and animation. The computers are not about to take over, despite what you hear. We don't have a clue how to do the hard stuff. The curious case of Benjamin Button actually had a Brad Pitt who wasn't Brad Pitt. He was driven behind the screens by Brad Pitt, but the avatar on screen was computer generated. I'm not sure this is one of those computer generated frames. That's the point. You can't tell when it's done right. And I want to close on this picture, which is done by my friend Mark Sager in New Zealand. He is modeling his daughter Francesca as she grows up. He's one of the world's experts on convincing human representations. He's done one extra thing. He's added an artificial intelligence behind Francesca's avatar. It's far, far, far short of an actual human 2-year-old, I hasten to tell you, but at least he's trying to build an artificial intelligence system in its very crude baby steps. So the idea here was to start my talk with a baby and end it with baby X is what he calls the project. And then I want to issue the challenge to you. Remember I said that Moore's Law is still going. It's headed for 1 trillion X by 2025. We still have 100X or 1,000X to go. Here's where I want you to try to imagine what you're going to do with 100X or 1,000X more computer power. I bet you can't do it, but you might try. Thank you.